Hey, what's up you guys? I'm Sara Lubratt, and in today's video we are doing a writing update talking about all the books I want to write, because the last time I made a video like this was over 2 years ago now, and so I wanted to update you guys on what I have been writing, what I'm planning to write, the projects I'm working on brewing up. I apologize for the really bad lighting. I was waiting for it to get sunny, but it has been snowing all day today and is still snowing, so this is the lighting we are working with. So now without further ado, let's get into talking about all 7 books I want to write, slash already have written, because the first book we're talking about is book 1 of Project DE. So, got the paper. The last time I filmed a writing update like this, I was working on draft 5 of Project DE. Project DE is a high fantasy told from 3 points of view with dragons, darkness, a relic-based magic system, found family, and a lot of characters finding themselves. I have since finished Draft 5, Draft 6, and Draft 7 of Project DE, which took quite a long time. I have also now passed the 9-year anniversary of coming up with the idea for Project DE, so I'm very happy that that book is now done, and I have started querying that project. I am going to just put out the disclaimer that I was only able to get out a couple queries before I then had to go on hiatus for the holiday season. That is something that is strongly recommended, is to not query during the holidays so that you don't end up at the bottom of an agent's slush pile. And a slush pile is basically all of the queries that somebody has to read through. Just because so many people take vacation and time off during the holidays, publishing is a lot slower, so you just want to make sure that you accommodate for that. So it's suggested to stop querying like mid-October and then pick up again in January. So I have started querying Project DE under the official title, which I'm not comfortable with sharing with y'all yet. I hope to eventually, but we're not quite there. And while we're talking about Project DE, I might as well also tell you guys that almost all of the titles that I share with you guys for my story names are abbreviations of the original concept. DE does not stand for an original title. It was just like the basic gist of the book when I first started it, which then became the backstory for the villain. I've talked about that in plenty of other videos, but Project DE is still what I call it. DE is still what it is in my heart. And I know it's been a while since I made one of these videos, but it's also very nice to be like, yeah, I finished draft 6, I finished draft 7, and I'm now querying. It makes it feel like I've made a lot of progress in the last couple years. So that's the writing update on Project DE. And now let's get into talking about what I was planning on writing next. So after I spent so incredibly long working on Project DE, and I really think this book needed it. I also think that I learned a lot that hopefully I will get to apply to future books so that future books don't take as long. But because I spent so many years and so many like dedicated years working on Project DE, I'm now giving myself a couple of palette cleansers. I'm calling them my palette cleanser projects just because they are significantly shorter. They are standalones, at least they were standalones. I have this really bad habit when I come up with a story idea and I think it's going to be a standalone. DE was going to be a standalone. It was going to be like 400 to 500 pages, and now the first book of 3 I think is 400 pages. So basically I wanted to give myself the opportunity to step away from DE before I start working on books 2 and 3, to write something different, something that's new and exciting, like a shiny new idea, just to like take a step back from DE, just get to enjoy drafting something with no pressure. And so the first of those 2 palette cleanser projects is a project that I'm calling Project Veil. Veil, unlike my other stories, is not an abbreviation, which is kind of fun and refreshing. Veil is also not veil like marriage, it is veil like obscuring something. And my goal for this project is 30,000 words of a fast-paced fantasy story. Fast-paced meaning that the 30,000 words takes place over the span of like 72 hours, maybe 3.5 days, but the gist is like 3 days. I just wanted to write something that was like pretty stream of consciousness that I could just get onto paper quickly, which so far has gone really, really well, because Project Veil is now sitting at 17,000 words as of last night. And I have just been having so much fun drafting something because I have not gotten the opportunity to draft a new story in a really long time. It just feels so fun and refreshing and totally feels like a reward for sticking with Project DE for so long. And so Project Veil and completing Project Veil was the first part of my 2-part goal for the end of 2024. And the other part of that goal was to also start another shorter story, also novella length of like 30 to 40,000 words. And this one I've been calling my sci-fi romance project. So as of filming this video, I have not yet started drafting my sci-fi romance story, but I did have 15,000 words for that drafted in a different story, Project CBH. We will get to that in a moment too. And I still need to reread those 15,000 words just to see what still works and makes makes sense for sci-fi romance, and I'll probably end up rewriting what I have written anyways because it's been several years since I've touched that. But the reason that I decided to separate my sci-fi romance project from my CBH project was because the two stories together would have been too large as one piece, and the sci-fi romance storyline within like the larger sci-fi CBH story happens on a different planet. The only character that overlaps is one of the characters' dads. And so when I finally started thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if this story really makes sense to be wrapped into the CBH novel or if this should be like its own fun novella. So then I made that decision of it should be its own novella just so that I can focus on that storyline, make it what I really want it to be, and also not, you know, have to find a way to tie that back in with my CBH story. So my goal for that story is also to be roughly novella length, somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000 words. I say sci-fi romance, it's a lot about environment. There is a little bit of a romance plotline, but most of it is just a character falling in love with her life. I'm really excited about this story. I think it's going to be challenging to write, but I think that I'm going to love when it's done. Which I feel like is true for a lot of stories, but I'm really looking forward to getting to draft this project. So Project Veil and my sci-fi romance book are my two palette cleanser stories that I'm treating myself to after finishing book 1 of Project DE. Those are also my goals for the rest of 2024, is to finish those two stories. But then after I finish these two palette cleanser projects, that's when I get to make the harder decision of what big book I'm writing next. Big book meaning like 100,000 plus words, and whether I want to start figuring out DE book 2 or if I want to write CBH. So let's talk about CBH first. Oh boy, CBH. I think I started writing CBH for NaNoWriMo a couple of years ago, and CBH is one that I have said the abbreviation for in previous videos, so I'm comfortable with sharing that here. But basically it stands for Cyborg Bounty Hunter, which was the original concept. I don't have a single idea of a legitimate title for this story yet, but I think I'm at about 50,000 words, but 15,000 of that will be switched over to being used for the sci-fi romance project. So I'm probably closer to like 35,000, and I was kind of writing without a purpose when I started writing it. Like, I didn't know how the story ended. I barely knew like any of the characters. I was very much discovery writing as I was going. And so in this project, I believe this will be a lot of rewriting, which is also a trend for me. To my current understanding, CBH will be a standalone novel. Hopefully. It was 3 points of view, including the sci-fi romance storyline. So after removing that, I now think it's 2 POVs. We will see what happens with that though. Project Veil and sci-fi romance are both 1 POV, and then Project DE is 3 POVs. I very much just choose whatever's going to work best for the story and which characters I want to feature. But I think as I discovery write CBH more, I will figure out if those 2 storylines are still the best, or if I need to add another one or take one of those away. I think that the 2 that I have currently will stay in the story. It's just more of a question about whether or not I should add in another. But I've loved writing for CBH so far, and I'm very excited to see where it ends up going. I have had a lot of ideas for it. I've been making a lot of notes for it. I think I'm starting to figure out a plot, which is exciting because sometimes that takes me a while, instead of just writing, you know, purely based off the vibes. But I am hoping that CBH will turn out to be around 100,000 words, so a full-length adult sci-fi novel. Next up are the books that I'm kind of avoiding talking about, which is DE books 2 and 3. Several years ago, as in like 4 years ago, when I was working on, I think that would have been like draft 2 of DE, I tried to sit down and outline the series, and obviously things have changed over the drafts, and it wasn't like a super comprehensive outline. It was more just getting some of my ideas down on paper and where I thought the general overarching story was going to end up. But I will need to outline books 2 and 3 at some point in the near-ish future. I also think that that would make my query a little bit stronger. It's also not recommended to query a series as a series, especially when you're trying to pitch like your debut novel, but that is what I'm doing anyways. And I do think that it would be a stronger pitch if I said that the next 2 books I had either started working on or at the very least had outlined, so that if an agent was interested, I had something that I could send them so that they knew where the story was going, which is also going to be a really interesting challenge because I am not an outliner, I'm not a plotter, but I do think that when writing a series, you need to know where the book is going, or like the story story overall is going. And I know how the book ends, and I know some of the things that happen in book 2, but I actually need to like sit down and figure out what's important, especially based on the edits that I had to make in draft 6 and 7 and some of the rewriting that I had to do in draft 6. I think that it would be very beneficial to sit down and try and figure out at least some of the major plot points that have to happen in books 2 and 3, just so that I have some major points written down so that I know where my characters are going and or where they emotionally need to be, what they have going on in their heads, etc. and so forth. So DE2 and DE3 need to be outlined. So the original gist that I had after I realized that I was 200,000 words into writing Project DE, and then I realized that it needed to be a trilogy and not just a 400 to 500 page like fantasy standalone. I then decided that the first book takes roughly 6 months. I want each of the 3 books to take roughly 6 months. Not to write, that is the dream timeline. But you know, the story takes place over 6 months in each book to then get us to the ending. I don't want there to be any like major time jumps. I want it to all be pretty succinct. Succinct as in, oh man, I can't even make that joke. DE was so long after draft 1 is done, but I can't think about that right now. I'm also hoping that writing books 2 and 3 will be a lot less time consuming than writing book 1 was, just because I spent so much time world building, I spent so much time fleshing out the story and where I wanted to get the story, that I'm really hoping that I've done the brunt of the work and now I just need to like sit down and write them. And I'm hoping that the stories will just come to me because I know the characters, I know the world, I know the magic system. Like, I'm really hopeful that it's not going to take me a crazy long time, but I know that these books will not take me 9 years to finish, which again is what the first book took me. So that's DE2 and DE3, which it also just feels so cool to finally be talking about books 2 and 3 after working on the first book for so long. So the 7th book that I want to mention in this video, I have a couple other back burner projects, but they are far enough on the back burners that we don't need to mention them in this video. But the last one I want to mention is my book that I call LRF. LRF is like more of a fantasy dystopian. I wrote this book in high school. It took me like 4 years to write the rough draft, but also not just the rough draft, because as I was working on the first draft, I was also going through and editing what I had already written, which I do not recommend. But this book has been drafted and I think is at like 80,000 words. The problem with LRF is that I don't know if there's a whole lot of plot. Like, it seems like there's a plot, but it never ends, and like it doesn't like get to anything at the end. So if I choose to do something with this book, LRF was the first book I ever wrote, and I'm very impressed that I got it to being revised and edited, and like I ended up taking out like the first 60 or 80 pages because they were just kind of filler before getting to where the story actually started. But the way that I started LRF was actually from a writing prompt that I found online, and it was something about seeing blood spilled across white linoleum, and that was the first scene of like the 60 or 80 pages that I had to remove. I also wrote this in high school, which is when like the Hunger Games and Divergent were really big, so dystopian was what was happening. And now I don't really know if this story is my top priority. I would say DE is still definitely my top priority. It has been for many years now. Clearly. I think that LRF could still be really fun, but it would need a pretty major rewrite, and I don't know if I want to do that at this point in time. So those are the 7 books that I am writing or have written or am working on in some capacity. The lighting has just steadily gotten worse this whole video, but thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I am very excited about the next couple of books that I'm going to get to write, and of course I will be making writing vlogs throughout that process so that I can share that with you guys, because writing can be a lonely experience, and I think that YouTube and Instagram have really done a good job about bringing writers together, or at least writers have found each other on those platforms. So thank you guys so much for being here. These are all the books I want to write right now. I'm Sara Lubratt, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.